Can you open your lens all the way? Your eyes, senses, sensibilities. Fill them with all the light flowing from every subject and object in your field of vision. Can you sharpen your focus to include their foregrounds, midgrounds, and backgrounds? Can you remove any filters? For pure sight is what you want, bright and wide, whole and clear. Good evening, everyone leaning in, far and wide, from around the corner and around the world. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, the 14th in this weekly series, coming to you live from Weekapaug, Rhode Island, by the sea, the deeply entrancing sea. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke, tonight inviting you to explore different ways of seeing, fresh and untamed, unconditioned ways of seeing, and seeing into ourselves, others, and the natural world wildly alive around us. So, inviting often inspiring ways to look, re-look at our life, our lifescapes and landscapes through evocative lenses, new and interesting and maybe less familiar ones that enable you, us, to see more deeply, more freely, humanly, poetically. All the images, by the way, for the broadcast are my own. Tonight's is the trunk of a quaking aspen. It was rendered when I was hiking one summer in Park City, Utah, visiting some wonderful friends now living up in Maine, Alan and Angela Shoemake, making their new home there. And I had some wonderful times with them a couple of years in a row. When these trees of eyes spoke to me vividly, to the mind's eye of this poet, when I was able to see them purely and artfully, and they, me, and I, in that moment of seeing them with a poet's eye or a creative eye, or more connected to the nature's eye, this poem came for the quaking aspens called Tree of Eyes. Tribal, immobile, pre-verbal, watching, witnessing, peering black and bluely out at the passing animals and men, the weather, wild and calm, each other, unblinking, sunrise to moonrise, simply, silently observing all. Tree of Eyes. So thinking about other ways other lenses, other ways we can look at many, many things, from ourselves to others to the world around us, adjusting even just our basic sight to the more subtle. And if you get up extra early, you see a whole other dimension of the world. I tend to get up around 5 these days, 5 in the morning, sometimes beating the birds to it. And this poem came one of those mornings, actually out in California a few years back. Before there's light, there's only shadow, intangible forms, shapes and silhouettes, lines and outlines, only traces, intimations, suspensions of things, an intriguing there but not all there-ness, until the light of day fills in the picture, fills out the substance, dispels the night shade, the noir, the elusive and illusory, pauses the shadow plays for another day. As I thought about aspects of seeing, all of us poets and other artists, of course, and others, developing and evolving and expanding, our ability to see many different dimensions, or see in many different ways, seeing into the enchantment of your surroundings. And over the years, I've done many poems that I call my mise en scène, sort of the middle of the scene. Literally, it means so you're in the midst of a scene, and how I see it as perhaps a painter might be looking at something, beholding it, and imagining what it is for them. And this was from Cobble Hill, Brooklyn. Some wonderful friends, Molly and Eriko, in Cobble Hill, where I did, I think, 3 or 4 poet in residencies. Wonderful times over a couple of years. And their house is enchanted. It's an old Lutheran church from approximately 1910-ish, and full of interesting energies and their own imprints. And it spoke to me so much. I wrote many poems, and this was called Going Below. It's another world under glass, with enchanted characters who etch themselves into your imagination as you travel the masked and spined passage to the sanctuaries, the ventricles below. There are places of interest, of local color, to see en route. A castle of ochre earth in southern Navarra, the white awninged Iruna Cafe in Pamplona, Yosemite Valley. Weathered brass bells are rung by a mixed tribe of natives to announce your presence, except a ghostly green figure with an enigmatic expression who can't be bothered. 3 old gents smile graciously, though seriously in need of dental work. Large, dark-furred dogs appear ahead, one crouching, one traversing. A couple beams in a state of newly wedded bliss. Parents smile in a 3-way moment with their boy. Beds are made for 2 to sleep, bare souls to bare souls. The story of a lifetime says much about the time capsule, space capsule library, from India, Istanbul, and Impressionism to the spell of the sensuous. Thick tomes, dense journals of neurology, to just the shadow of the wind, maybe to the indefinable mind. Adjoining inner sanctums are next, left and right hemispheres, separated by cool squares of blue. In the left, a man pulls a bright wool hat over his eyes as a lovely nude dances overhead with fans. 2 seats await mist from an atomizer. 3 sets of eyes stare out at you from the midground by degrees of expressiveness, of opening, if not openness. There are folk dances in progress here, soft summer light falling on the face of the same church. Vintage friends, flying birds, a rich sense of persona, a mood of mindfulness, free-form curiosity. In the right hemisphere is a sea-green chair to sit and observe from. Survey heads from antiquity, mythology, personal anthropology, pairs of Brahma bulls, skyward lifted hands, ginkgo leaves, 1 yellow, 1 green, porcelain pale innocence, male and female. There are Alibaba boxes, likely holding treasures, the sound of surf from Waikiki, and a white ladder to climb away from all thinking and working into soft, quiet, and peaceful nesting. So look at what we can see into, feel into, imagine into, delight into, in just the space around us. Slipping on my glasses. I forgot to put those on. I could read a little better. Also in Cobble Hill, another one of those residencies was the seeing into a day with rampant curiosity and delight. I was in the neighborhood, and I felt like a flaneur, a sort of wanderer and muser on things at no particular destination. And I was thinking of the wonderful French photographer of times past, Eugène Atget. And this poem flew up into me. An Atget day. No bellows, negatives, or long exposures, only a stream of silent reflections rendered in the lens of my 3rd and 4th eyes, as I flaneur about in the early morning light among the sleeping shops lining the west side of the village street, all steeping in the clear September sun, each front its own endlessly faceted glass plate, holding intaglios of inner and outer space, objects, intersects of still and moving moments, revealing scenes, mise-en-scènes, soon to vanish in the stirring of the city's clockwork men and machines, in the day's arriving congress and commerce. What about seeing into your formings, the things and people that brought you here, parents, ancestors? I was in Greece some years back, and I was walking. It was a very hot day, very bright. I had a straw hat on. Actually reminded me of my father from my childhood. But I looked into a window as I was walking by, and I saw him. I saw my father for probably the first time I'd really seen him in my face. I always felt I looked mostly like my mother, but that day, that time, there he was in my face. And this poem came right to me. I see him, is the poem. I see him in the self-portrait I make on the road to Vorkari, his pure manliness, his handsomeness, fathered into my face, eyes, nose, and brow in deep shadow under a brim of coconut straw, a touch like the summer hat he used to wear with a madras band, mine unbanded, half my expression in shadow, the other, mouth, chin, and his jaw, our jaw, in high sun, turned at a slight right and upward angle to the camera, a portrait in sun and shade of father. I think often of the amazingness when we can see into the soul of someone else. It doesn't happen often. We have to be very intimately connected with someone to see that, but maybe you've had the experience or want to have the experience. You can have it. And I've had it a few times over my life, and this was one time I could see into the soul of a beautiful man on his 83rd birthday. He was the father of one of my daughters-in-law at the time. His name was Earl Burgett. He was an amazing fellow. And this poem was written in his honor, in my seeing of him more deeply. Earl's eyes, blue as blue hydrangeas. They've seen the world at war and peace, mountains and the men who move them, children and grandchildren come and childhood go. Thousands of moons full and waxing, suns rising, faces of all kinds and cultures smiling. They've opened widely in love and closed shyly in kisses, cried for a lifetime of joys and sorrows, of sentiments and great moments of exuberance. And the more they see and let and light inside, the more we see through those luminous, endless blue eyes of you. Earl's eyes. I miss him. He's a beautiful man. Well, he lives inside me. I see him in a way. How about seeing under our skins, our social skins, getting down to the marrow? Under the skin is this poem. Let's take away the trappings, especially the bank accounts, everything added. Subtract. Strip all the way down to your skin. I'll do the same. Then let's be here with nothing but our flesh and bones, breath and blood, eyes and souls, hearts, hands, and see how we each stand, where we each really, relatively are, in simply ourselves. I read this in another broadcast, this next poem. I thought so apropos for tonight. It was written in the winter, a couple of winters ago. And it's about truly, fully seeing another. And it was inspired by a story about African tribesmen who practice this, still have forever. And it was so beautiful. It led to this poem, which is called Seen with Joy. I see you, says the one, emerging from the forest. I am here, says the other, meeting their kinsmen in the clearing. The same way African bush men and women for centuries greeted one another, rejoiced in the seeing and being therewith for each other, with such exclamation, exultation, is how I, maybe you, too, desire to be seen, received, and be present to every significant other, friend, loved one, lover. You are here. You see me. I am here. I see you. I've had many experiences, as maybe some of you have had, in seeing into the mysterious, the mystical, the ethereal. I'm very open to that, and have had various experiences like this one I'm about to share with you, where I was in a woodland and I saw a woodland spirit, I guess we'll say. It was a figure in a tree, on a tree, and it just opened me into to this moment, this experience, this story, the spirit of the overwood. He didn't disappear when I approached, stepping off the empty, winding path toward his curious shape and his whiteness, so alluring against the dimness of the late afternoon and the wet darkness of the tree bark he floated over. Instead, he appeared as intrigued as me about this visiting spirit, equally foreign but invitingly fresh to him. One oblong and elliptical meeting one hourglass and symmetrical. His brawny torso and spindly legs dangled above the sea of dry leaves. Sparks danced goldly from his body. His oval mouth, glossy and rubbery, tribal, exclamatory, was open wide. And the closer I looked, I could see he was made of upflowing waves, of subtle shades. His left arm hung easy at his side, his right angled up, and in that palm, or what I styled it, he held a glossy cluster of food from his overwood, an offering, I felt, here, simply, quietly, in this serendipitously spirited place. When the last of the day's light left, the woodland sprite disappeared with it, but the sight of him and the taste of his ethereal treat remained. As I thought about our curation or choices of poems for this evening on ways of seeing, I immediately felt we ought to hear a poem by Galway Kinnell. If you don't know him, he's not alive now. He's a wonderful Vermont man, poet, Kinnell. And a poem I've read so many times to myself and others. Spring Oak. Seeing into the beauty of nature and the seasons. Spring Oak. Above the quiet valley and unrippled lake, while woodchucks burrowed new holes and birds sang, and radicals began downward, and shoots committed themselves to the spring and entered with tiny industrious earthquakes. A dry-rooted, winter-twisted oak revealed itself slowly, and one morning, while the valley underneath was still sleeping, it shook itself, and it was all green. How marvelous. Thank you, Galway Kinnell. I've written many odes to trees. I'm quite taken with them. They're such great spirits, and this was written for the grandfather trees on an old estate in New Jersey, in Madison, New Jersey, a few years back, a few early falls back. This one is called They Wear Their Scars, for the grandfather trees. They wear their scars with dignified bearing, their once fierce, now faded slashes and gouges, breaks and heavy blows, like medals of valor, from their battles with the ravages, savagings of unkind times, indifferent elements, still standing, all greenly and gallantly, stout-heartedly, in the old low-cut meadow, under bountiful white clouds and constable blue skies, on this soft and most peaceable mid-September afternoon. They wear their scars. So more types of seeing. What about seeing into the greater richness of a simple landscape? This was in Maine, and I was out walking somewhere, and it was by flashing water, and as so many parts of Maine are. And this poem arrived called Over and Under. It was written at Fernald's Neck at Young Neck Preserves in Lincolnville, Maine, October 2017. Over and Under. In the over story, hemlock and juniper, sweet fern and hardhack, alder and hackmatack, blueberry, butternut, chestnut, sumac, witch hazel, willow. In the understory, mushrooms and mosses, curling roots and glacial rocks, blown down trunks, soft flowing streams of pine needles, florets of lichen, dark-lived burrows. In the mid-story, eye-bright flashes of sun on jubilant lake water, seen through silhouetted skeins of light-bathing branches. This wild and free body of showing, telling stories. Over and under. What about seeing into the incredibleness of our fellow creatures on the planet, who I feel are just as equal as we are? We are no greater or lesser than they are. We're just another species. And I feel the more we can honor them and have humility about our place in the scheme of things, that they have an equal place, the better we'll be. So, how about the whale, great mammal, fellow mammal? I was musing on them and how we used them in time for things, and that they're still there, beautiful creatures. This was called carriers of light, to honor them. They swam inside the collars of stiff-shirted men, the skirts and corsets of well-contained ladies. The silk folds of tightly rolled umbrellas were worn round bodies and held over heads through rain, sun, seasons. The bones of mighty to behold creatures, and all their sacred oil, that flamed street lamps for carriages and coachmen, lit night lamps for readers, for lovers, fed ticking clocks on tall mantels, essential fuel, rare as the milk of queens, spilled wantonly, unwantedly, from the ancient rovers of the oceans, from unfathomably many innocent carriers of light, life, song. I have a friend who would always tell me wonderful stories. He was born and grew up in Kansas, and tell me about his childhood, and I've written a few different poems that were inspired by that, and I loved him telling me a story about a buffalo head nickel and a head of a buffalo that was in his school on the wall. And all of this came to me when I heard that, what it brought up for me. And I wrote this for my friend Paul Wayner a few years ago. It's called The Great Head. Once upon a time you saw it sculpted on the surface of coins, or gazed upon many from the windows of a lone train steaming in black and white across the great plains, as they and their muscular bodies grazed, roamed, sometimes thundered in massive herds, dark shoals over the grasslands, or stood unseen by men in the depths of winter, turned straight and steady into the wildest wind blasts, fiercest blizzards. Each great head, mighty shoulders wearing, bearing a natural kind of nobility, solidity, like the surrounding mountains, like the big sky mountains of white, marbled western clouds, serving unknowingly as a sacred symbol of abundance and fortitude for a native people, as a spirit of raw strength for a pioneering nation, as a mammoth woolly mascot for a Kansas schoolboy in Emporia, who mused on one often as it gazed out from the sun-rayed wall of his humble school hall, its broad, horned head held high, the monumental, unshakable American buffalo. We're coming toward the latter part of our time together again, and I have a few more for us if you'd like to keep listening. The seeing into the dearness and rareness of close friends. I'm sure we all have some, or more than some, and I consider them my spirit family, probably sometimes even more deeply than my blood family, the way things have played out. And this is written for a marvelous friend who lives in Italy, Englishman, Patrick Richmond Nicholas, and it was written on his birthday back in 2016. He may be listening tonight over in Italy, and it's called 10 of 10, number 10 of 10. On the 283rd day, the 10th day of the 10th month, Anno Domini, there you suddenly were, pink in all possibility, and here you still are, in the pink and all patricality. Aside from sharing a date when Triton, Neptune's largest moon, Ecco una luna, was discovered, Verdi, Watteau the painter, and Harold the Pinter were also born, and Eddie Cantor took a permanent powder. You stand Englishly and Italianly, nowly and nostalgically, as your own rare man, behind and beyond the lens. It's from my friend Patrick, a marvelous, artful photographer. Alice Ostreicher wrote a poem, and for some reason I felt this could be not only amusing, but about choosing not to see things. So we have ways of seeing things, and here's ways of not seeing them, or sort of not seeing them. And I don't know when she wrote this, but it's called Locker Room Conversation. There are some men my husband never sees with their pants on, though they work at the same university, guys from other departments. Men, it seems, don't bother wearing towels in the locker room, though at his age there's often plenty to hide. He and his buddies have eyed each other for so many years, on and off the squash court. What would be the point? In the shower they chat about their games, about the last op-ed, or they gossip and tell jokes and do business. He likes to describe this camaraderie, and I like to imagine the naked men in their various stages of beauty and decay, splashing, surrounded by brightly falling water. The muscular definition of smooth youth, the humorous pouchiness of the middle-aged, the crisp ligaments of the old, that squashy layer of boy fat under the skin, at last consumed. Their bodies like engravings you could title Persistence or Integrity, and sometimes even the very old, softened again like very old wool, all showering in a hum of conversation. He likes to mention some of the specimens I would enjoy, the big-necked boy athletes, the Indian MD in his 50s, graceful as Shiva. Today he tells me someone he's never seen walked into the shower, a kid, near 7 feet, black curly hair, bronze except for a bikini mark, blue eyes, face of an angel, body of a Greek hero, thighs the circumference of my husband's waist, dong of a god, and conversation stopped. Every man just soaped and rinsed himself. Afterward, as they dressed, my husband asked a couple of friends, "What did you think of that guy?" "What guy?" they said. Thank you, Alice Ostreicher. So, last two poems for us tonight. Sort of closing, seeing into our centers and our place and ponderings in the universe, I suppose we could think of this one related to. And it was a poem for the winter solstice, 2019. As above and below, as the sun and gyring heavens, the ancient constellations above, balance with the turning earth, this terra firma we call home below. Maybe in their solstice, pausing and stilling, we can find our own place and peace of balance between them and within. Feel the deeper harmony of our being, our equally remarkable and faithful natures. Welcome this season of our life, the rhyme of our living, and a sense of our next unfoldings, whatever they may be, however clear or mysterious, as we follow through all familiar and unknown bareness, darkness, the light of our own bright gathered inner stars. Spread the warmth of the truest, tenderest parts of our hearts. Lean in to the comforting grounding of our earthly bodies. as we wayfare out, singly and together, toward more sun-long days, gentle springs, and footloose, time-soft summers. And our last poem, so we had the winter solstice, and since we're in the summer, is one for the summer solstice. That was from last year, June. This bridge, the one we all cross, to more light. A bridge made purely of sun and earth, nowhere to be seen, only sensed. A brief but beautiful crossing, worth looking out at the world from, looking at your moment in life from. From this bridge that spans our way to another season of fruitfulness, opens us to what's above and wide around us, without closing off all that's passing underneath, that suspends us in air like birds or clouds, anchors us in the bedrock of nature, holds us in a great balance and presence as we journey through our lengthening and shortening time. Thank you for leaning in and for your welcome donations by PayPal and Venmo and directly through my site. That greatly help support these programs and poetic arts. Ones listeners tell me are most meaningful, which I'm delighted to hear, since my desire is to soothe, inspire, and uplift as many spirits as I can. But especially thank you for listening in and for your enthusiasm and allowing me to share these poems and poetic seeings. Replays of all the broadcasts are online to share or hear another time. I hope you'll lean in again. Until then, good days ahead, days of richer perspective, deeper seeing ahead, and good spirits.